My name is Delaney Foster. I am 34 years old, and on the morning of my fifth wedding anniversary, I was standing in a stranger quiet kitchen with a cake box in my hands, listening to my marriage end before I had even said hello. A few hours earlier, I had been on the highway telling myself this surprise was romantic, maybe even brave. My husband had called the night before and said he was stuck helping family again, and I did what I had done too many times in 5 years. I made excuses for him. I left work late, picked up his favorite chocolate bourbon cake, and drove through the night thinking maybe love still looked like effort if one person was willing to carry enough of it. By the time I reached his sister house, my eyes were burning, my back ached, and my makeup had long since given up, but I was still smiling. I really believed I was about to give us a memory we would laugh about one day. The front door was unlocked. I stepped inside quietly, careful not to crush the frosting, and then I heard his sister say, in that smug little voice that always made my skin tighten, that he just wanted me gone for a few months so the house could finally be peaceful. I froze before I even reached the kitchen. Then my husband answered, calm and cold, like he was discussing weather, and said if something happened to me, the insurance money would be worth it. I did not scream. I did not drop the cake. I set it down, turned around, and walked right back out of the house like I had never been there. By sunrise, my phone was already starting to light up. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you are listening from, what the weather is like where you are. I just want to know how far my story can travel. I did not answer a single call on the drive back. I let the screen light up and go dark, light up and go dark, over and over, until the sound itself started to feel like something scratching at my nerves. By the time I crossed back into Tennessee, I had 68 missed calls, more texts than I could count without getting sick, and one thought repeating in my head so clearly it felt borrowed from somebody stronger than me. Do not go home first. So I did not. I pulled into my friend Cassie Vaughn's apartment complex just after 8 in the morning, looking like I had been dragged behind my own life for 200 miles. Cassie opened the door in sweatpants, took one look at my face, and did not ask the kind of questions people ask when they want details before they offer comfort. She just stepped aside and said, "Come in." I stood in her kitchen holding my car keys so tightly they had left marks in my palm, and for the first time since I heard his voice in that house, I told someone out loud what he had said. Cassie did not interrupt me. She did not soften it. She did not tell me maybe I had misunderstood. When I finished, she reached across the counter, took my phone out of my hand, turned it face down, and said, "You are not calling him back until you decide what keeps you safest, not what keeps him calm." That sentence steadied me more than sleep could have. I showered, borrowed a t-shirt, and sat on the edge of her guest bed staring at the ceiling while every moment of the night replayed in pieces that felt sharper each time. The unlocked door. His sister laughing. His voice, flat and practical, like my life had already been converted into a number. Somewhere around noon, I finally started reading the messages. The first few were frantic. "Where are you? Please answer. I can explain." Then they shifted. "You are being dramatic. You heard part of a conversation." Then softer again. "Baby, please talk to me. I love you." I knew that pattern. Panic, blame, tenderness, confusion. It was not remorse. It was control wearing different jackets. Cassie sat beside me with a legal pad and told me to start writing down everything I remembered, every exact phrase, every timestamp, every detail I could pin to the wall before anyone tried to make me doubt my own memory. So I did. I wrote down what time I left work, where I bought the cake, when I stopped for gas, what his sister said, what he said, how long I stood there, and the way my body went cold before my mind caught up. Then, because I needed something concrete to hold, I opened our banking app. At first, I told myself I was just checking to make sure no bills had bounced, but within 10 minutes, I was sitting straighter, my whole body alert. There were transfers I did not recognize, not huge enough to draw attention all at once, but steady, repeated, careful. A few hundred here, 1,000 there, all moving into an account connected to a business name I had seen before on a holiday gift bag and never thought twice about. His sister's boutique. My stomach tightened so hard I had to set the phone down. For months, maybe longer, money had been leaving our household and sliding into hers. Money I had assumed was going toward repairs, savings, maybe the kitchen remodel he kept promising we would start next spring. I kept scrolling and found more things that now looked different under the light I had been forced to stand in. Late fees that did not make sense. A credit line balance that had grown without discussion. A premium increase on a life insurance policy we had updated only 6 weeks earlier, after he told me we should be more responsible now that we were in our 30s and thinking about the future. At the time, I had called it practical. Sitting on Cassie's bed with the sunlight moving across the carpet, it did not feel practical anymore. It felt like the kind of paperwork a person hides behind when they want evil to sound organized. Cassie did not tell me what decision to make. She was too smart for that. She only said that whatever happened next, I needed to stop thinking like a wife, trying to preserve a marriage, and start thinking like a woman protecting her life. That afternoon, I moved my paycheck into my personal account, changed every password that belonged only to me, backed up my work files, and emailed myself copies of everything I could legally access. I did not drain anything. I did not touch what was needed for the mortgage or utilities. I was not trying to punish him. I was trying to make sure I would not wake up a week later and realize that while I was busy being heartbroken, he had quietly rearranged the ground under my feet. Late that evening, after the call slowed and the messages turned into long paragraphs full of excuses, I finally listened to one voicemail. His voice cracked in all the right places. He said he had been stressed, that his sister twisted things, that he never meant it the way it sounded. But there are sentences in life that do not need context. There are some words you hear once and never again in the same way. I sat there in the dim light of Cassie's guest room and understood something that hurt almost as much as what I had overheard. The sentence in that kitchen had not come from nowhere. It had come from a place inside my marriage that had been rotting quietly for a long time, and now that I had heard it, I could not unknow it. The next morning, I drove back to the house while he was still in Alabama, and the whole neighborhood looked painfully normal. Sprinklers on neat lawns, a dog barking down the street, someone dragging a trash bin to the curb. It felt wrong that everything could look so ordinary when my marriage had just cracked open in somebody else's kitchen. I let myself in, stood there for a second, and listened to the silence. My shoes were still by the bench. A cardigan I had been looking for was still hanging over a chair. The framed wedding photo was still on the entry table. Everything looked the same, which somehow made it worse. I was not there for closure. I was there for what mattered. I took my passport, birth certificate, professional license, laptop, journals, my mother's ring, and every financial record I could legally copy. Then I sat down in the home office and started going through the files one by one. Once I stopped looking at those papers like a trusting wife and started looking at them like evidence, the pattern was impossible to miss. Transfers to his sister's business, charges hidden inside household expenses, paperwork tied to her boutique that should never have touched our marriage. His sister's name was everywhere: a storage unit, vendor payments, even paperwork connected to a lease problem. I realized this was bigger than one cruel sentence. He had been using the life we built together to keep her afloat, and he had done it in small enough pieces that I never saw the full damage until now. The longer I sat there, the more old memories started shifting into place. The anniversary trip he canceled because she had an emergency. The holiday dinner he left early to help her with inventory. The way he always brushed me off when I asked simple questions about money. He used to smile and say I worried too much, or tell me to leave the numbers to him, like my wanting clarity in my own marriage was somehow unreasonable. At the time, I told myself he was just better with finances. Now I saw it for what it was. He had trained me to stay away from decisions that affected my own life. Around noon, my neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Pike, knocked softly and stepped halfway in. She looked from the file boxes to my face and said something I never forgot. "Take what matters first, honey. People never think clearly once panic starts." It was exactly what I needed to hear. So I kept going. I packed medication, chargers, a week of clothes, my grandmother's recipe cards, and the ceramic mug my students gave me last Christmas. Small things, ordinary things, proof that my life existed outside him. Before I left, I stood in the bedroom and looked around at the home I had spent years making warm and steady. And all that time, he had been letting his sister move through our marriage like she belonged there more than I did. By the time I loaded the last box into my car, I understood something I had been too loyal to admit before. What I heard in that kitchen had shocked me, but it had not come out of nowhere. It was the natural language of a marriage where disrespect had been excused for so long that it had finally become comfortable saying itself out loud. Vanessa called me that afternoon from a number I did not recognize, and for a moment I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I thought about the tone in her voice from that kitchen, that smug little twist of satisfaction, and I answered because I wanted to hear what cruelty sounded like when it was forced to clean itself up. She did not start with an apology. She started with annoyance. She said everyone was worried, that Grant was beside himself, that I needed to stop making this bigger than it was. Bigger than it was. I looked around Cassie's living room, at the banker's box full of copied records by my feet, and realized some people can say monstrous things with the calm confidence of people who have never really been held accountable. Vanessa kept talking, telling me I had overheard half a conversation, that people say dark things when they are stressed, that families joke in ways outsiders do not understand. Outsiders. I had been married to her brother for 5 years, had hosted her at my table, bought her birthday gifts, sent flowers when she had the flu, and now she was reducing me to an outsider because it suited her. I asked her one question. If it was just a joke, why did he raise the insurance coverage 6 weeks ago? The silence on the line was so sudden and clean I could hear her breathing. When she finally spoke again, her voice had lost that easy edge. She said I was being paranoid. I said no, I was being observant. And then I hung up. An hour later, Grant showed up outside Cassie's apartment building. He must have guessed where I was because Cassie was the only person I trusted enough to run to without warning. He was standing by his truck when I looked through the blinds, shoulders slumped, both hands shoved into his pockets like a man trying to make himself look harmless. Cassie asked what I wanted to do, and I surprised myself by saying I would talk to him, but outside, and only for a few minutes. I did not want a scene in her home. I did not want him stepping into another safe place and treating it like something he could manage. The air was warm and heavy when I walked out. He took one step toward me, then stopped when he saw my face. I had loved this man's face. That was the humiliating truth of it. I knew the faint scar by his chin from a high school baseball accident. I knew the crease that formed between his eyebrows when he was tired. I knew exactly how his mouth looked right before he smiled for real, and now all I could hear when I looked at him was that sentence. If something happens to her, the insurance money is worth it. He started crying almost immediately, which would have destroyed me a week earlier. Now it only made me tired. He said he had panicked after I left, that he knew I had heard him the second he turned and saw the cake box on the counter, that he had been sick over it all day. He said he did not mean it, that Vanessa had been winding him up for months, that money pressure had made him say something evil and stupid and not true. He kept saying not true like repetition could turn language into smoke. When he paused for breath, I asked him whether he would have told me on his own if I had not heard it. He stared at me. His eyes dropped to the parking lot. That was answer enough. I took out my phone and opened the audio file I had listened to 3 times the night before. Not because I enjoyed it, but because pain gets very sharp when it is forced into exact words. On the drive down to Alabama, I had been using a voice notes app to record pieces of a letter I thought I might read to him over dinner. Something soft and hopeful about 5 years of marriage and surviving hard seasons. I forgot to stop the recording when I stepped into the house. I did not know it had captured anything until I was back at Cassie's, shaking so hard I could barely unlock my phone. But it had. Not the whole conversation, just enough. Vanessa's voice saying he wanted me gone. Grant's voice answering that if something happened to me, the insurance money was worth it. I pressed play and held the phone between us. He went pale so fast it was like watching blood retreat. When the clip ended, neither of us spoke for a second. The traffic from the main road hummed behind us. Somewhere above, an air conditioning unit rattled. Ordinary sounds, brutally out of place. He whispered my name and reached toward me, and I stepped back before he could touch me. I told him tears were not the same thing as truth, and panic was not the same thing as remorse. I told him he did not get to call it a joke just because hearing it back made him hate himself. Then I said the only thing that felt clean and solid in my mouth. From now on, if you need to say something to me, you can say it through a lawyer. His face changed when I said that. Not sadness this time. Consequence. Real consequence. Finally visible. And for the first time since that anniversary morning, I saw him understand that I was no longer standing in front of him as the woman who would stay and help him explain himself. I was standing there as the woman who had heard the truth and survived it. By the end of that week, my lawyer had drafted the separation papers, and seeing my life reduced to dates, signatures, and legal language should have felt cold. Instead, it felt merciful. There is something strangely comforting about documents when the truth has been twisted too many times. Paper does not cry. Paper does not backtrack. Paper does not tell you that what shattered you was just stress, or a joke, or a misunderstanding you were too emotional to interpret correctly. Paper simply records what is being done. Miles Harlan, the attorney Cassie helped me find, was in his early 50s and had the kind of steady voice that made Panic feel slightly embarrassed to be in the room. He listened without interrupting, asked careful questions, reviewed the bank transfers, the insurance documents, the audio file, and then told me something no one in my family had ever taught me clearly enough. You do not need to prove someone intended to love you badly in order to protect yourself from the damage they caused. That sentence stayed with me. We filed for a formal separation first, put communication boundaries in writing, and made it clear that any contact outside logistics needed to go through legal channels. The minute Grant realized I was no longer taking calls, his messages changed again. The apologies became longer, then sharper, then desperate. He said I was humiliating him. He said I was making a private mistake public. He said I was punishing him instead of helping him fix it. Every message told on him in a new way. A man who truly understands what he has done does not center his own embarrassment before the other person's fear. Around the same time, another truth came toward me from a direction I had not expected. Tyler Beck, one of Grant's oldest friends, sent me a short message asking if we could talk. I almost ignored it, because by then I was exhausted from hearing versions of the same excuse dressed in different clothes, but something in his wording felt careful, almost ashamed, so I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop halfway between my office and Cassie's apartment. Tyler looked like a man who had been carrying a secret too long and hated himself for the shape it had taken. He did not waste time pretending the situation was complicated in a flattering way. He told me Grant had been complaining about me for over a year, not in the obvious dramatic way people complain when they want out, but in a smaller, meaner way that slowly poisons how others see a person. He said Grant called me intense when I asked about money. He said Grant rolled his eyes about my routines, my caution, my work, the way I liked plans and calendars and knowing what was happening in my own household. Tyler said that more than once, Grant had described me as someone who made the house feel heavy, too orderly, too serious, too controlled. I sat there with my coffee untouched and felt something inside me go still. I had spent years trying to make our home peaceful. Warm meals, birthday reminders, Sunday grocery lists, quiet evenings without chaos. A life that ran on thoughtfulness instead of crisis. And somewhere along the way, he had started translating stability into suffocation because it made him feel less guilty about wanting the opposite of responsibility. Tyler kept going, and each sentence stripped another layer off the lie I had been married inside. He said Vanessa fed that resentment every chance she got. She would tell Grant that he had changed since marrying me, that he used to be fun, spontaneous, loyal to family first. Family first. The phrase turned my stomach now. Tyler admitted there were nights when Grant sounded less like a husband and more like a man auditioning excuses for why his own choices were someone else's fault. I asked Tyler why he was telling me this now. He looked down at his hands and said, because he heard what happened in Birmingham from Grant himself, and for the first time it had stopped sounding like venting and started sounding dangerous. He said, I should have said something sooner. I am sorry I did not. I believed him, and somehow that apology from a near stranger landed deeper than all of Grant's frantic messages. It carried no self-defense, no performance, just regret. After that meeting, I sat in my car for a long time and understood that the ugliest part of betrayal is not always the headline moment. Sometimes it is discovering that the person who shared your bed had been quietly editing your identity in other people's minds while you were still defending him in your own. The practical side of my life kept moving, because it had to. I informed my supervisor that I was dealing with a personal legal matter and asked that no one give out my schedule or confirm my presence if anyone called asking for me. I updated emergency contacts. I removed Grant's access where I could. I met with Renee again and began mapping out what was mine, what was shared, and what had been blurred on purpose. The more we uncovered, the clearer it became that he had not just failed to protect our marriage from his sister. He had used the structure of our marriage to subsidize her chaos, all while letting me think I was imagining the distance growing between us. Vanessa, of course, did what people like her always do when they start losing control of the story. She took to social media with vague little posts about betrayal, selfish women, and how some people abandon family the minute life gets hard. She never used my name, but she did not need to. The message was obvious. What surprised her, I think, was that people were less willing than she expected to play along. A few mutual acquaintances stopped reacting altogether. One even messaged Cassie to ask if I was safe. That word mattered to me. Safe. Not dramatic. Not bitter. Not overreacting. Safe. That night, I sat on the edge of Cassie's guest bed again with the old ceramic mug in my hands and let myself admit something I had been resisting because it felt too painful to name. The sentence about insurance money had horrified me, yes. But the deeper wound was this. The man I loved had not only imagined life without me, he had slowly trained himself to see my devotion as background noise, my steadiness as pressure, and my presence as something negotiable. And once a person starts seeing you that way, they do not need to push you out the door to betray you. They only need to keep standing there while others help them imagine the house would be more peaceful without you in it. Months passed, and the noise around everything finally began to fade. What surprised me was not how much quieter life became without Grant. It was how much clearer it became. At first, I measured time by legal emails, forwarded documents, and whether I could get through a workday without my chest tightening for no reason. Then, little by little, life started returning in ordinary ways. I slept through the night again. I stopped checking parking lots before walking into work. I could hear my phone ring without feeling dread. Peace felt unfamiliar at first, like something my body no longer knew how to trust. Grant, meanwhile, seemed to change all at once. He moved out early, sold his truck, stopped sending emotional messages, and started therapy. Tyler told me he had joined an accountability group and was finally taking responsibility instead of hiding behind excuses. Even Cassie admitted he looked different. But change is not the same thing as repair. One evening in early fall, I received a handwritten letter from him through my attorney. He did not beg me to come back. He said he had spent months trying to understand how he had become the kind of man who could say something so ugly and then try to explain it away. For the first time, he did not blame his sister. He blamed himself. He wrote that he had started seeing my steadiness not as love, but as something permanent, something that would always be there while he poured himself into everyone else. He admitted he had mistaken my calm for endless capacity, my forgiveness for permanence, and my loyalty for permission. He said that when money got bad and his sister kept pushing, he let himself think about escape instead of accountability. Not because he wanted me dead, but because he had reached a point where he spoke about my absence like it would solve his problems. That line stayed with me because it was finally honest. When I told Cassie what he wrote, she asked me one question that cut through everything. If he really is changing, would going back heal you, or would it only reward the version of him that broke you? I sat with that for a long time, and when the answer came, it was simple. Going back would not feel like healing. It would feel like asking my body to live again inside a place where it had already learned it was not fully safe. Around the same time, I started seeing our marriage more clearly than I ever had while I was inside it. I remembered how many anniversaries, dinners, and quiet plans had been rearranged around his family's latest crisis. I remembered how often I made myself smaller to keep the peace. I remembered the little jokes about me being too organized, too serious, too careful. None of those moments felt marriage ending on their own, but together they formed a truth I could no longer ignore. I had been useful in that marriage, reliable, dependable, steady, but I had not been truly cherished, and once I understood that, I also understood something even sadder. Some people do not realize the value of peace until they destroy the person who was creating it for them every day. By winter, the divorce was no longer a threat hanging over Grant's head. It was final, signed, and impossible to cry, charm, or explain away. In the end, I did not have to destroy him. The truth did that on its own. Once the financial records were fully reviewed, it became clear how much damage had been done behind my back. Grant had funneled far more of our shared money into Vanessa's failing boutique than I first realized, and because he had blurred personal and marital funds so recklessly, most of the legal and financial fallout landed on him. He lost the house. Not because I wanted revenge, but because he could not afford to keep it once the hidden debts, legal fees, and business obligations surfaced all at once. The house he said would be more peaceful without me in it was sold 3 months later, and the irony was almost unbearable. Vanessa's fall came even faster. Without Grant quietly covering bills, signing things he never should have signed, and stepping in every time her business slipped, the boutique finally collapsed under the weight of what it truly was. Not bad luck, not unfair timing, just years of vanity, poor decisions, and the belief that someone else would always save her before the floor gave out. Vendors came looking for payment. Her landlord refused to renew the lease. The store shut down before spring, and the same woman who once talked about me like I was disposable ended up moving out of her condo into a small rental on the edge of town, suddenly learning what instability feels like when nobody is left to absorb it for you. What neither of them expected was the social cost. People can excuse debt, family dysfunction, even betrayal. But there is something about hearing a man speak casually about his wife's death being financially useful that settles differently in people's minds. Even those who wanted to stay neutral started backing away. Invitations dried up. Mutual friends became former friends. Tyler cut Grant off for good after the divorce. A cousin who had defended Vanessa for years stopped speaking to her after hearing the audio for herself. No courtroom speech could have punished them more cleanly than being forced to live inside the reputation their own words created. Grant wrote to me one last time after everything was final. It was brief. No performance, no begging. He said he was moving into a small apartment outside Murfreesboro, had taken a lower position at work after everything unraveled, and was trying to rebuild a life he now understood he had been careless with. He ended by saying that losing me was the first consequence that taught him what consequences really were. I believed him. That did not change anything, but I believed him. Vanessa never truly apologized. She sent one message through a relative saying, "Families say ugly things under pressure," and that I had turned one bad night into a catastrophe. It was the last thing I ever heard from her, and somehow it fit perfectly. People like Vanessa do not lose because they grow a conscience. They lose because eventually, there is no one left willing to finance the damage they call personality. As for me, I signed the final papers on a quiet Thursday afternoon and drove home with the windows cracked and the radio low. No dramatic speech, no tears in the parking lot. Just one long breath I felt all the way down to my ribs. That night, I bought myself another chocolate bourbon cake from the same bakery. I set it on my kitchen counter in my own apartment, lit a single candle, and stood there smiling at something the old version of me would not have understood. It did not feel like celebrating a divorce. It felt like honoring survival. It felt like closing the door on the woman who believed love meant enduring every insult as long as it came from someone she had promised forever. I understand something now that I wish more women were taught much earlier. A person does not have to raise a hand to become dangerous to your life. Sometimes all they have to do is stop valuing it. Sometimes the real warning sign is not rage, but indifference dressed up as stress, entitlement dressed up as family loyalty, selfishness dressed up as exhaustion. When someone starts speaking about your absence like it would make their life easier, believe what that says about their heart. The most expensive thing Grant and Vanessa lost was not the house, the boutique, the money, or the friends who disappeared. It was access. Access to me. Access to the peace I created, the stability I maintained, and the loyalty I gave so freely that they mistook it for something they could spend without limit. They were not ruined because I plotted against them. They were ruined because they treated decency like a renewable resource and learned too late that it was not. My life is smaller now in some ways, but it is honest. I go to work, I come home, I cook dinner in a quiet kitchen, and nobody in that space is secretly imagining how much easier life would be if I disappeared. That may sound simple, but to me, it feels sacred. If there is any lesson in my story, it is this. Love without respect is only dependency in a prettier outfit. Loyalty without boundaries becomes permission for the wrong people to use you. Peace is not something you beg other people to give you. Sometimes it begins the moment you stop offering yourself to those who are willing to measure your worth against what they could gain from losing you. Grant and Vanessa did pay a high price. They lost money, status, comfort, trust, and the version of life that depended on my silence. But the price I paid bought me something better than revenge. It bought me myself. The team behind Revenge Argon is working hard to create meaningful and engaging stories that leave a lasting impact on our audience. We want to make it clear that this is a fictional story created to share educational lessons, positive values, and thoughtful life messages with viewers. Delaney handled the situation with strength, calm, and self respect instead of reacting in anger. She chose to protect herself, think clearly, and walk away with dignity, which made her response even more powerful. If you were in her position, how would you have handled it, and what choice do you think you would have made?